Hey guys, tonight we slip into the perfumed haze of ancient Persia, where the air is thick with the scent of roses and ambition. You're standing in the heart of Persepolis, the grand capital of the Achaemenid Empire, around 500 BCE, and the bazaar hums with life. Picture yourself weaving through crowded stalls, where merchants in flowing robes hawk tiny glass vials that shimmer like liquid jewels. The scent of rosewater hits you, a floral whisper that's somehow both delicate and overwhelming. It's not just a fragrance, it's a status symbol, a sacred elixir, and a trade good worth its weight in gold. But here's the kicker. If you spill a drop, you'll be dodging glares from traders who spent weeks crafting it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the bazaar now, and it's a sensory overload. The sun beats down, glinting off copper trays piled with rose petals, dried herbs, and strange powders. Merchants shout over each other, their voices mingling with the clink of coins and the rustle of silk. You pause at a stall where a grizzled vendor, his beard streaked with dust, pours rosewater from a clay jug into a delicate flask. His hands move with practiced care, but his eyes are sharp, sizing you up. Rosewater wasn't just a luxury here, it was a cornerstone of Persian culture, used in everything from religious rites to royal feasts. A mainstream fact, the Achaemenid Empire, spanning from Egypt to India, made rosewater a trade staple by 400 BCE, with Persepolis as its glittering HUD. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some merchants swore their rosewater could cure lovesickness, though you'd probably just end up smelling like a garden and still pining. Historians still argue whether these claims were clever marketing or genuine belief in rosewater's magic. Either way, you're tempted to buy a vial, if only to see what the fuss is about. You notice the crowd, nobles in embroidered tunics, traders with sun-worn faces, even a few priests with shaved heads, all sniffing vials like they're judging fine wine. You pick up a flask, cool to the touch, and the scent swirls around you, sweet but not cloying, like a breeze through a rose garden. You're half convinced it could make you feel like royalty, but then you fumble the vial, and the vendor's glare could curdle milk. "Careful," he mutters, "that's a week's work." You smile sheepishly, wondering how something so simple could be so precious. The answer lies in the process, hours of harvesting, distilling, and bottling, all done by hand. You're about to ask the vendor more, but he's already haggling with a customer who's trying to pay with a goat. Typical bazaar chaos. As you wander deeper, you spot a corner stall draped in crimson cloth, where a woman with coal-lined eyes pours rosewater into tiny silver bottles. She's muttering something about royal quality, and you catch a whiff of her wares, stronger, richer, like roses mixed with a hint of spice. You're starting to get why this stuff was a big deal. It wasn't just about smelling good, it was about power, piety, and prestige. You dodge a cart piled with rose petals, nearly tripping over a stray cat that's clearly unimpressed by the bustle. The bazaar's alive, and you're right in the thick of it, ready to uncover the secrets behind this fragrant obsession. You step away from the buzzing bazaar, the scent of rosewater still clinging to your robes, and find yourself in a quiet courtyard where the air feels heavier, almost sacred. You're standing outside a small stone shrine, its walls etched with symbols of fire and sun, and you realize you're about to uncover why rosewater was more than just a pretty smell in ancient Persia. It's woven into the spiritual fabric of Zoroastrianism, the empire's dominant religion, where purity and reverence for nature were everything. You push open the wooden door, and the cool darkness inside wraps around you like a whisper. A priest in a white robe tends a small flame on an altar, and the faint aroma of rosewater rises from a silver bowl beside it. You're not just in a shrine, you're witnessing a ritual that's been unchanged for centuries, though you'd probably fumble the prayers if you tried to join in. The shrine's walls are bare but for a few carvings of winged figures, and the flickering fire casts shadows that dance like spirits. You watch the priest dip his fingers into the rosewater, sprinkling it over the altar with a murmur of ancient Avestan words. The droplets catch the light, sparkling briefly before they vanish. Rosewater wasn't just a fragrance here. It was a tool of purification, used to cleanse sacred spaces and honor Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god of wisdom. A mainstream fact: Zoroastrian texts from the 6th century BCE, like the Avesta, mention rosewater in rituals to ward off impurity, making it a staple in temples across Persia. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some priests believed rosewater could soothe angry deities, though you're skeptical it calm a god having a bad day. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or if they genuinely thought roses held divine power. You're leaning towards symbolism, but the priest's solemn face makes you wonder. You're invited to sit on a woven mat, and the priest hands you a tiny clay cup filled with rosewater. "Drink," he says, his voice low. You hesitate. Drinking perfume sounds like a recipe for regret, but you take a sip. It's surprisingly mild, floral but clean, like spring water kissed by petals. The priest explains that rosewater was used to purify the body before prayer, a practice so common that even farmers carried small vials to temples. You glance at the altar, where the fire crackles softly, and notice a stack of rose petals drying in a corner. The priest catches your gaze and chuckles. "Roses are the earth's offering," he says, "but they don't grow themselves." You grin, imagining him grumbling about stubborn rose bushes. As you sip again, you feel the weight of the ritual. This isn't just about cleanliness, it's about connecting to something bigger. You think back to the bazaar, where merchants sold rosewater like it was liquid gold. Now you see why. It wasn't just for the wealthy. It was for the devout, a bridge between the mundane and the divine. You set the cup down, careful not to spill, and the priest nods approvingly. Outside, you hear the distant hum of the city, but in here, time feels still. You're tempted to stay longer, but the priest gestures toward a garden visible through a window, where roses bloom in neat rows. "That's where it begins," he says, and you know you're headed there next. You step toward the door, the rosewater scent lingering on your hands. The ritual has left you oddly calm, like you've brushed against something eternal. You wonder if the priests back in the bazaar were onto something with their lovesickness cures. Maybe it's not magic, but it's close. As you push the door open, the sunlight blinds you for a moment, and you hear a faint chant from another shrine nearby. The world outside is calling, and you're ready to see how those roses go from garden to sacred bowl. You're trudging through a misty Persian garden just before dawn, the air cool and heavy with the scent of roses. The sky is a soft gray, barely awake, and you're surrounded by rows of rose bushes, their petals glistening with dew. You're here with farmers, their hands calloused and stained pink from early harvests, plucking roses with a care that feels almost reverent. Each petal is a treasure, destined to become the rosewater you smelled in the bazaar and sipped in the shrine. You try your hand at picking one, but the thorns prick your fingers. Ouch! You're not cut out for this, and you're pretty sure the roses know it. The garden stretches across a gentle slope, framed by low stone walls and irrigation channels that glint in the faint light. You hear the soft trickle of water and the occasional bleat of a goat in the distance. The farmers move methodically, filling wicker baskets with deep red and pale pink blooms. A mainstream fact: ancient Persians by 500 BCE had mastered rose cultivation, with gardens in regions like Fars producing thousands of blooms for rosewater distillation. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some farmers swore the best roses were picked under a crescent moon, claiming it made the scent stronger, though you suspect they just liked working in the cool night air. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or a practical trick to avoid midday heat. You're not sure, but the dawn chill makes you glad you're not out here at midnight. You follow a farmer named Kaveh, his tunic damp with mist, as he explains the art of choosing the right roses. Two open, and they're past their prime, he says, snipping a tight bud with a small bronze knife. You nod, pretending you get it, but your own basket has maybe 3 roses, one already wilting. Kaveh laughs, not unkindly, and tosses you a perfect bloom. Smell that, he says. You do, and it's like the bazaar in a single breath, sweet, fresh, a little spicy. You're starting to see why these gardens were worth guarding like fortresses. The air warms as the sun creeps up, painting the sky in pinks that match the roses. You notice a few workers sorting petals into piles, discarding any with blemishes. It's painstaking, and you're glad you're just visiting. You think back to the shrine, where Rosewater purified the altar. None of that would happen without these farmers. Kaveh tells you the petals will be carted to a workshop nearby, where they'll be boiled and distilled. You're curious, but also a bit tired. Dawn starts are rough. You stifle a yawn, and Kaveh grins. City folk, he mutters, shaking his head. You laugh, caught, and promise to keep up. As you help carry a basket, the weight surprises you. These roses aren't just flowers, they're the heart of an industry, sacred and commercial all at once. You spot a distant hill where more gardens bloom, and you realize this is just one piece of a vast network. The bazaar's chaos and the shrine's calm both start here, in the quiet of a misty morning. You're ready to follow the petals to the next step, where they're transformed into that liquid gold you've been chasing. You're standing in a dusty workshop just outside the garden, where the air hums with the faint sweetness of roses and the tang of heated metal. The space is cluttered with clay jars, wooden tables, and stacks of rose petals that spill onto the packed earth floor. You're watching a perfumer, her hands nimbled and stained with petal juice as she sorts through baskets of fresh roses brought in from the dawn harvest. She's muttering to herself about perfect batches, and you're trying not to sneeze from the overpowering floral scent. This is where Rosewater is born, but one wrong move with these finicky tools and you're probably left with a pot of soggy petal soup. The workshop feels like a mix of alchemy and chaos. Copper stills, their surfaces tarnished but gleaming in spots, sit over small fires, while clay pipes snake across the room carrying steam to cooling jars. You lean closer to a still, feeling the heat on your face, and watch as petals are packed into its belly. A mainstream fact, by the 5th century BCE, Persians had refined distillation techniques, using copper stills to extract rosewater for both trade and ritual. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some perfumers added secret ingredients, like crushed seashells or saffron threads, claiming it gave their rosewater a divine edge, though you suspect it was mostly for bragging rights. Historians still argue whether these additives were practical or just superstitious flair. You're betting on flair, but the perfumer's focus makes you second guess. She hands you a small ladle and points to a pile of petals. Pack them tight, she says, her voice sharp but not unkind. You try, but your clumsy hands crush half the petals, earning a sigh. City hands, she grumbles, and you chuckle, caught again. You watch her layer the roses with precision, then pour water over them before sealing the still. The fire crackles, and soon a faint steam rises, carrying that familiar rose scent. You're mesmerized by the process, simple yet delicate, like brewing tea for the gods. The perfumer catches you staring and smirks. It's not magic, she says, just patience. You're not so sure. It feels like a spell. The workshop's rhythm is steady but intense. Assistants scurry about, hauling water from a nearby well and stoking fires with dried twigs. You notice a shelf of finished rosewater in glass vials, their stoppers sealed with wax. Each one catches the sunlight, glowing like tiny amber lanterns. You think back to the bazaar, where these vials were haggled over, and the shrine, where they purified the air. It all starts here, in this dusty, petal-strewn chaos. You're tempted to ask for a vial, but the perfumer's already shooing you toward a cooling jar to check the first drops. Careful, she warns, or you'll burn more than your pride. You laugh, dodging a stray petal, and realize this workshop is the beating heart of Persia's rosewater obsession. As you step back, the scent lingers on your skin, and you feel oddly proud of your small role, even if you're no master perfumer. The workshop hums along, and you know the next stop is deeper into the sacred side of this craft, where rosewater meets fire and faith. You're stepping into the shadowed heart of a Zoroastrian fire temple, where the air is warm and thick with the scent of burning sandalwater and rosewater. The stone walls, worn smooth by centuries of devotion, glow faintly under the eternal flame flickering on a raised altar. You're watching a priest, his white robes catching the firelight as he pours rosewater from a silver ewer into a shallow basin, the droplets shimmering like stars. This isn't just a ritual, it's a dance of purity, where rosewater cleanses the sacred space before prayers begin. You're trying to stay quiet, but the urge to sneeze from the heavy incense is real, and you're pretty sure the gods would frown on that. The temple is small but feels vast, its silence broken only by the priest's low chants and the soft crackle of the fire. You notice rose petals scattered around the altar, their edges curling in the heat. The priest dips a bundle of twigs into the rosewater, sprinkling it over the flame, and a faint floral steam rises, curling toward the ceiling. A mainstream fact, Zoroastrianism, by 500 BCE, used rosewater in rituals to symbolize purity, with fire temples across Persia incorporating it into daily worship. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some priests kept sacred rosewater in special vials blessed under moonlight, believing it held extra spiritual potency, though you suspect it was just a way to impress devotees. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief or a ritual flourish to elevate temple status. You're leaning toward flourish, but the priest's reverence makes you wonder. You're invited to sit on a stone bench, and the priest hands you a small clay cup, just like in the shrine you visited earlier. For cleansing, he says, gesturing for you to sip. You do, and the rosewater is cool, with a faint bitterness that lingers. It's not exactly refreshing, but it feels intentional, like you're part of something ancient. You think back to the garden where the roses were picked and the workshop where they were distilled. That journey ends here, in this quiet act of faith. The priest notices your curiosity and smiles faintly. The rose is humble, he says, but it carries our prayers. You nod, though you're half convinced he's just really good at sounding profound. The ritual continues, and you watch the priest move with a precision that feels almost choreographed. He refills the basin, his hands steady despite the heat. You spot a few worshippers entering, their heads bowed, each carrying a tiny vial of rosewater as an offering. The temple's air feels charged, like a storm's about to break, but it's peaceful too. You're starting to get why rosewater was so central, not just for its scent, but for its role in connecting people to their gods. You stifle that sneeze, barely, and the priest gives you a look that says he noticed. You grin sheepishly, hoping you haven't offended the divine. As you rise to leave, the rosewater scent clings to you, a reminder of this sacred moment. You glance back at the flame, still burning steady, and feel a quiet awe. The temple doors creak open, and you're headed toward a very different scene, where rosewater meets the opulence of a royal banquet. You're swept into the glittering chaos of a royal banquet hall in Persepolis, where the air shimmers with the scent of rosewater and roasted saffron. Long tables groan under platters of spiced lamb, figs, and flatbreads, while nobles in jewel-toned robes recline on silk cushions, their laughter mingling with the strum of a lyre. You're clutching a bronze goblet, and a servant pours rosewater-infused wine that catches the torchlight like liquid rubies. The king, draped in purple and gold, sits at the hall's center, his presence commanding yet relaxed, as rosewater is sprinkled over dishes to bless the feast. You're trying to blend in, but you're pretty sure you'd spill that wine if you tried to toast the king. The hall is a riot of color, crimson tapestries, turquoise tiles, and golden candelabras casting flickering shadows. Servants glide through the crowd, carrying silver ears of rosewater to drizzle over sweets or spritz into the air, cooling the warm night. A mainstream fact, a caiman at royal feasts, documented in texts like the Persepolis fortification tablets, often used rosewater as a culinary and ceremonial staple by 500 BCE, showcasing the empire's wealth. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some nobles insisted on rosewater-soaked napkins to wipe their hands, claiming it kept them youthful, though you suspect it just made them sticky. Historians still argue whether this was a health fad or a display of decadence. You're betting on decadence, but the scent is so divine you almost buy the hype. You take a sip of the wine, and the rosewater's floral note cuts through the tartness, smooth and surprising. A noblewoman nearby, her hair braided with pearls, offers you a rosewater-dusted pastry. "Taste the king's favor," she says with a wink. You bite into it, and it's sweet, flaky, and just a bit overwhelming, like eating a garden. You smile, hoping you don't have crumbs on your face, and she laughs, clearly amused by your rookie status. You think back to the fire temple, where rosewater was sacred. Here, it's indulgence, a flex of power in every drop. You're starting to see how it bridged the divine and the decadent. The king raises his goblet, and the hall falls quiet. A servant sprinkles rosewater over his plate, a ritual that feels oddly like the priest's altar cleansing. You notice the other guests mimicking him, dipping fingers in rosewater bowls before eating. You try it, and the cool liquid feels luxurious, though you fumble and splash your tunic. A nearby noble chuckles. "New to court?" he asks. You nod, grinning, and he passes you a napkin. Yep, soaked in rosewater. You're half tempted to keep it as a souvenir, but you wipe your hands instead, feeling briefly royal. As the feast continues, you weave through the crowd, dodging a servant balancing a tray of rosewater jellies. The lyre player switches to a slower tune, and the hall's energy softens, like the night itself is exhaling. You're struck by the extravagance. Rosewater isn't just a scent here, it's a statement. You're ready to leave the opulence behind and follow the trade routes that carried this liquid gold across deserts. You're trudging across a sun-scorched desert, the horizon shimmering like a mirage, as you join a caravan laden with rosewater bound for distant lands. The camels plod steadily, their bells jingling softly, while merchants in dust-streaked robes clutch reins and squint against the glare. You're perched on a swaying camel, gripping a leather strap, and the faint scent of rosewater wafts from clay jars packed in straw-filled crates. The trade route stretches endlessly, a lifeline connecting Persia to empires far beyond. But one wrong step in this sand, and you're probably lost forever. The heat is relentless, and you're already dreaming of the bazaar shade. The caravan is a small world of its own. 10 camels, a dozen merchants, and a few armed guards scanning for bandits. You notice the jars, sealed with wax to survive the journey, each one a tiny fortune. A mainstream fact, by 500 BCE, the Persian royal road, stretching over 1,600 miles, facilitated trade of goods like rosewater from Persepolis to places as far as Egypt and India. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some merchants sprinkled rosewater on their camels' noses, swearing it calmed them during storms, though you're pretty sure the camels just sneezed. Historians still argue whether this was a practical trick or just desert superstition. You're leaning towards superstition, but when a gust of sand hits, you're tempted to try it. A merchant named Bahram, his beard caked with dust, offers you a sip from his water skin, laced with a hint of rosewater naturally. It's refreshing, though you wince at the thought of wasting such a precious commodity. "Keeps the spirit light," he says with a grin, and you laugh, wondering if he's selling you on the idea. You think back to the royal banquet, where rosewater was a luxury drizzled over pastries. Here, it's a survivor, packed carefully to withstand weeks of heat and jostling. Bahram points to a distant ridge, saying, "Susa's that way, big market for our roses." You nod, trying to look like you know where Susa is. The sun climbs higher, and you pull your scarf tighter against the sand. You notice a guard sniffing a small vial of rosewater, his face softening for a moment. It's a strange contrast, hardened men, harsh desert, and this delicate scent tying them to home. You ask Bahram how they protect the jars, and he shows you a crate lined with wool and straw. Like cradling a child, he says, and you chuckle, imagining him singing lullabies to his cargo. The caravan pauses at a small oasis, and you dismount, your legs wobbling like a newborn foal's. The merchants unpack a few vials, trading with a passing nomad for dried dates. You're struck by how rosewater, born in misty gardens, thrives even here. As you remount, the caravan lurches forward, and you feel the rhythm of the journey settle into your bones. The scent of rosewater lingers, a reminder of the gardens, workshops, and feasts you've seen. You're ready to see how this fragrance heals, not just camels or nobles, but the sick and weary in Persia's tents. You're ducking into a canvas tent on the outskirts of Persepolis, where the air smells of herbs, sweat, and the faint sweetness of rosewater. The tent is a makeshift healing space, lit by a single oil lamp that casts trembling shadows on the woven walls. You're watching a physician, his tunic stained with saffron and dust, as he mixes rosewater into a clay bowl filled with crushed herbs, creating a tonic for a weary traveler slumped on a mat. The patient's face is pale, but the physician's calm hands and the rosewater scent seem to ease the tension. You're tempted to ask for a sip yourself, but you're pretty sure you'd just get a lecture on vital humors instead. The tent is cramped, with shelves of jars holding powders, roots, and vials of rosewater that glint like amber in the lamplight. You notice a stack of linen bandages soaked in a rosewater solution, drying on a wooden rack. A mainstream fact, ancient Persian medicine, as recorded in texts like the Vendidad around 500 BCE, used rosewater for its antiseptic properties, treating wounds and calming fevers. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some physicians claimed rosewater could balance the soul's fire, a poetic way of saying it might help with anxiety, though you suspect it just smelled better than their other concoctions. Historians still argue whether this was early pharmacology or mostly placebo. You're leaning toward placebo, but the traveler's sigh of relief makes you wonder. The physician hands you a small cloth to dip in the rosewater bowl. Dab his forehead, he says, nodding toward the patient. You comply, feeling the cool liquid soak through the cloth, and the traveler murmurs thanks, his eyes half closed. The scent is soothing, like a memory of the gardens you visited at dawn. You think back to the caravan, where merchants guarded their rosewater like gold. Here, it's medicine, a bridge between luxury and necessity. The physician catches your curiosity and grins. Roses don't just please the nose, he says, they mend the body. You nod, though you're half convinced he's overselling it. You glance around, noticing other patients, a child with a bandaged arm, an old woman sipping a rosewater tincture. The physician moves between them, mixing more tonics with practiced ease. You ask about the recipe, and he shrugs, tossing in a pinch of mint. Experience, he says, tapping his temple. You chuckle, imagining him experimenting on himself first. The tent's atmosphere is calm but purposeful, and you're struck by how rosewater ties these scenes together, from bazaar stalls to sacred altars to this healing space. You step back to give the physician room, nearly tripping over a stray jar. He laughs softly, city feet, he mutters, and you grin, caught again. As you leave the tent, the rosewater scent clings to your hands, and you feel a strange sense of calm, like you've been healed without knowing you were sick. The evening air is cool, and you're ready to explore how Persian women use this same elixir to transform their daily rituals. You're slipping into a sunlit courtyard in Persepolis, where Persian women gather under a canopy of woven linen, their laughter mingling with the soft splash of a fountain. The air carries the delicate scent of rosewater, and you notice a group of women, their robes dyed in shades of saffron and indigo, applying it to their skin with small clay applicators. They're sharing beauty secrets, their hands moving with grace as they dab rosewater on their cheeks, promising a glow that rivals the morning sun. You're tempted to join in, but you're pretty sure you just end up with a wet tunic and a puzzled look. The courtyard is a haven of calm, with rose bushes blooming in terracotta pots and a breeze rustling the linen overhead. A young woman, her hair adorned with silver pins, offers you a tiny vial of rosewater. "For your face," she says with a smile, and you hesitate, feeling out of place among these experts. A mainstream fact: ancient Persian women, as noted in archaeological records from the 5th century BCE, used rosewater as a cosmetic, valuing its cooling and moisturizing properties in the arid climate. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some claimed rosewater could charm the heart, a romantic notion that had suitors lining up, though you suspect it was more about confidence than magic. Historians still argue whether this was a cultural beauty standard or a subtle form of social power. You're leaning toward power, but the women's giggles make you think it's a bit of both. You dab the rosewater on your wrist, and it's cool, with a scent that's fresh yet lingering, like a whisper of the gardens you saw at dawn. The women nod approvingly, one joking, "Now you'll steal all the poets' hearts." You laugh, hoping you don't look as awkward as you feel. You think back to the healing tent, where rosewater soothed the sick. Here, it's about beauty, but also ritual, a daily act that feels almost sacred. Another woman shows you how to mix rosewater with almond oil, creating a lotion that glistens on her skin. "Every day," she says, like a prayer. You're struck by the care they take, turning a simple liquid into a moment of connection. The fountain's rhythm lulls you, and you notice a girl teaching her younger sister to apply rosewater with a soft cloth, their giggles echoing. You ask about the recipe, and an older woman, her hands lined with age, shares a tip. Add a drop of myrrh for extra radiance. You nod, though you're not sure where you'd find myrrh in this courtyard. The women's chatter weaves stories of weddings and feasts, all scented with rosewater, and you realize this isn't just about looking good. It's about identity, community, even power. You fumble with the vial, nearly dropping it, and a woman laughs. "City hands," she teases, and you grin, caught again. As you step back, the rosewater scent lingers on your skin, and you feel oddly refreshed, like you've borrowed a bit of their radiance. The courtyard hums with life, and you're ready to follow rosewater's journey beyond Persia, along the trade routes that carried its fame. You're trudging along the fabled Silk Road, a dusty ribbon of earth stretching beyond Persia's borders, where the scent of rosewater mingles with the musk of pack mules and the tang of distant spices. You're part of a caravan, swaying on a camel's back as it plods through a rocky pass, the sun dipping low and painting the hills in shades of amber and rose. Merchants around you, their turbans dusted with sand, guard clay jars of rosewater nestled in straw-cacked crates, destined for markets in China, India, or even Rome. The journey's long, and you're pretty sure you'd rather be back in the perfumer's workshop than bouncing on this camel's hump. The caravan is a moving tapestry. Mules laden with silk bales, traders bartering dried figs, and guards scanning the horizon for bandits. You notice a merchant sniffing a rosewater vial, his face softening as if he's back in Persepolis gardens. A mainstream fact, the Silk Road by 500 BCE was a network of trade routes linking Persia to Asia and the Mediterranean, with rosewater among its prized exports, valued as much as saffron or gold. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some traders used rosewater to bless their goods, believing it ensured safe passage, though you suspect it just made their cargo smell better than their neighbors. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual practice or a clever way to mark premium wares. You're leaning toward marketing, but the merchant's earnest nod makes you wonder. You ask a trader named Farhad about the jars, and he shows you one, its wax seal stamped with a rose emblem. "This will fetch a fortune in Chang'an," he says, eyes gleaming. You take a whiff, and the familiar floral scent cuts through the desert's dryness, a reminder of the bazaar you left behind. You think back to the royal banquet, where rosewater was drizzled over sweets. Here, it's a commodity, carried thousands of miles to grace foreign courts. Farhad laughs as your camel sways, nearly toppling you. Hold tight, city dweller, he teases. You grin, clutching the reins, and promise not to fall. Yet. The caravan pauses at a small oasis where you dismount to stretch your aching legs. Traders unpack a few vials, bartering with local nomads for water and bread. You watch a deal unfold, a vial of rosewater swapped for a woven rug, and realize this liquid is currency, a bridge between cultures. You try to help unpack a crate, but your clumsy hands knock over a jar, earning a groan from Farhad. Good thing it didn't break, he mutters, and you chuckle, caught again. The sun sets, casting long shadows, and the rosewater scent lingers, tying this dusty road to the gardens, shrines, and feasts you've seen. As the caravan prepares to move on, you feel the weight of the journey, not just the miles, but the stories carried in each jar. You're ready to peek into the guarded world of the perfumers who crafted these precious blends, their secrets locked away in ancient recipes. You're creeping through a dimly lit alley in Persepolis, your sandals scuffing against the cool stone as you approach a heavy wooden door marked with a faint rose carving. Behind it lies the guarded world of a master perfumer, where ancient recipes for rosewater blends are kept like state secrets. You knock, and the door creaks open to reveal a small room cluttered with scrolls, clay jars, and bundles of dried roses hanging from the rafters. A perfumer, his eyes sharp despite his graying beard, peers at you over a table strewn with parchment. He's copying a recipe, his quill scratching softly, and you're pretty sure you'd be tossed out if you sneezed on his precious notes. The room smells like a rose garden after rain, with undertones of myrrh and crushed herbs. You notice a bronze scale, tiny weights shaped like birds, and a clay tablet etched with measurements. A mainstream fact: Persian perfumers by 500 BCE recorded detailed recipes on clay and parchment, some surviving in archaeological finds like the Persepolis Administrative Archives, blending rosewater with spices for trade and ritual. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some perfumers hid decoy recipes in their workshops, fake formulas to mislead rivals, though you suspect it mostly confused their apprentices. Historians still argue whether this was paranoia or a savvy business tactic. You're leaning toward paranoia, but the perfumer's wary glance makes you think twice. He gestures for you to sit on a stool, handing you a scrap of parchment with a recipe: rosewater, saffron, and a pinch of ambergris. Read, don't touch, he says gruffly. You squint at the spidery script, feeling like you're decoding a spell. The ingredients are precise, but there's a note about stirring under starlight that sounds suspiciously poetic. You ask about it, and he chuckles, a rare crack in his stern demeanor. The stars don't care, he admits, but clients do. You laugh, imagining nobles paying extra for cosmic rosewater. You think back to the Silk Road, where these blends fetched fortunes. This room is where that value begins, in ink and secrecy. You glance at a locked chest in the corner, probably stuffed with the real recipes. The perfumer catches your stare and narrows his eyes. Curious, eh? He says, and you nod, trying to look innocent. He shows you a less sensitive scroll, detailing a rosewater and mint blend for cooling summer skin. You're tempted to jot it down, but his quill pauses as if daring you to try. You grin, backing off, and notice a vial of finished rosewater on the table, its amber glow catching the lamplight. You ask to smell it, and he relents, holding it under your nose. It's rich, layered, like the banquet hall's wine, but sharper. You're impressed, but you fumble the vial, nearly dropping it. City hands, he barks, and you laugh, caught again. As you leave, the rosewater scent lingers, and you feel like you've glimpsed a hidden world. The perfumer's work ties the gardens, workshops, and trade routes together, a quiet art behind the empire's fragrance. You're ready to step into the vibrant chaos of a festival where rosewater flows freely under the stars. You're swept into the heart of a Persian festival under a starry night sky, where the air pulses with the scent of rosewater and the rhythm of drums. You're standing in a sprawling courtyard lit by flickering torches, surrounded by revelers in flowing robes, their faces flushed with joy as they splash rosewater from clay bowls, laughing as it sparkles on their skin. The crowd sways to the music of lutes and tambourines, and you're dodging droplets, trying not to slip on the damp stone tiles. This is a celebration of spring, a nod to the roses that fuel Persia's soul. But one overzealous toss, and you're probably soaked through. The courtyard is alive with color, saffron veils, turquoise sashes, and garlands of fresh roses draped over every surface. You spot vendors weaving through the throng, offering rosewater-soaked sweets and tiny vials for revelers to share. A mainstream fact, festivals like Nowruz, celebrated in Persia since at least 500 BCE, often featured rosewater as a symbol of renewal, sprinkled during rituals to bless the new year. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some festival goers believed splashing rosewater on strangers brought good luck, though you suspect it was just an excuse to start a water fight. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual custom or a playful social tradition. You're leaning toward play, but the earnest smiles around you hint at something deeper. A young woman with coal-lined eyes hands you a bowl of rosewater, urging you to join the fun. "Toss it," she says, already splashing a giggling child nearby. You hesitate, then flick a few drops, hitting a passing merchant who laughs and returns the favor. The rosewater is cool, its scent sharp and floral, like the gardens you saw at dawn. You think back to the Perfumers workshop, where those secret recipes were born. Here, they're unleashed, transforming a courtyard into a fragrant chaos. You try to aim another splash, but your aim's off, soaking your own sandal. The woman laughs. "City aim," she teases, and you grin, caught again. You weave through the crowd, passing a group dancing in a circle, their robes swirling as they scatter rose petals. A vendor offers you a rosewater jelly, sweet and wobbly, and you bite into it, the flavor bursting like a memory of the royal banquet. The music slows, and a storyteller steps forward, reciting verses about roses and rebirth, his voice blending with the night's hum. You notice some revelers sprinkling rosewater toward the stars, a gesture that feels half prayer, half joy. You're tempted to join, but your bowl's nearly empty, and you're not sure you'd get the ritual right. The festival's energy is infectious, though, and you feel lighter, like the rosewater's lifting your spirits, too. As the night deepens, the torches burn low, and you're ready to slip into a quieter corner of this fragrant world, where royal perfumers craft scents fit for kings under the same starry sky. You're sneaking through a shadowed corridor in the royal palace of Persepolis, your footsteps muffled on the polished stone as you approach a heavy cedar door guarded by a stern soldier in bronze armor. Beyond it lies the king's private perfumery, a secretive chamber where elite artisans craft rosewater blends reserved for royalty. You slip inside, and the air hits you, rich with roses, myrrh, and a hint of cedar smoke, like a garden trapped in a jewel box. A perfumer, clad in a silk robe embroidered with gold, works at a marble table, mixing rosewater with rare spices, his movements precise but guarded. You're trying to stay unnoticed, but you're pretty sure one clumsy step could get you banished to the stables. The chamber is small but opulent, with alabaster jars lining the walls and a bronze brazier glowing softly, casting flickers on intricate tile mosaics. You spot a crystal vial of rosewater, its amber glow catching the light, labeled with cuneiform you can't read. A mainstream fact. Achaemenid kings like Darius I around 500 BCE maintained private perfumeries to create exclusive scents, as noted in royal records, showcasing their wealth and divine status. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some royal blends included ground lapis lazuli, believed to make the scent God-touched, though you suspect it just sparkled expensively. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual practice or a flex of royal excess. You're leaning toward excess, but the perfumer's intense focus makes you wonder. He notices you and beckons you closer, pointing to a bowl where rosewater swirls with saffron and a shimmering blue dust. "Smell, but don't touch," he says, his voice low. You lean in, and the scent is intoxicating, floral, spicy, and oddly regal, like the banquet hall you visited, but richer. You think back to the festival, where rosewater was splashed freely. Here, it's treated like liquid gold, each drop measured with a tiny silver spoon. You ask about the lapis, and he smirks. "The king likes his gods close," he says. You chuckle, imagining Darius sniffing his divine perfume and feeling invincible. You're tempted to dip a finger in the bowl, but the soldier's glare keeps you honest. The perfumer pours the blend into a vial, sealing it with wax stamped with a royal seal. You notice a shelf of similar vials, each unique, some with amber flecks, others with a faint green tint. The artistry is staggering, and you realize this is where the empire's prestige is bottled. You fumble with a stray rose petal on the floor, and the perfumer raises an eyebrow. "City feet?" he asks, and you laugh, caught again. The chamber feels like a secret heart of the palace, tying the gardens, workshops, and trade routes into a single fragrant thread. You're ready to step back into the night, where Rosewater's mystique takes on a more magical hue. As you leave, the scent clings to you, and you feel like you've glimpsed the king's private world. The corridor leads you towards stories of Rosewater's mystical allure, whispered under the same starry sky. You're sitting cross-legged under a starlit sky, gathered with a small crowd around a fire in a quiet Persepolis courtyard, where a storyteller spins tales of Rosewater's mystical allure. The flames cast a warm glow on the faces around you, their eyes wide as the old man, his voice low and rhythmic, describes Rosewater as a potion that can sway hearts and summon dreams. You're clutching a clay cup, the faint scent of rosewater rising from it, and you're half convinced the stories are true, though you'd probably just fall asleep if you tried to test their magic. The night air is cool, and the distant hum of the city feels like a lullaby. The courtyard is simple, with packed earth underfoot and rose bushes lining the edges, their petals catching the firelight. The storyteller leans forward, his robe patched but dignified, and gestures to a vial of rosewater on a small table. A mainstream fact, ancient Persian folklore, preserved in oral traditions by 500 BCE, often linked rosewater to spiritual and emotional powers, used in rituals to invoke love or clarity. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some tales claimed rosewater could make you dream of your true love's face, though you suspect it just made your pillow smell nice. Historians still argue whether these stories were poetic metaphors or believed as literal magic. You're leaning toward poetry, but the crowd's rapt attention makes you second guess. You sip the rosewater, its floral taste soft but lingering, like a memory of the gardens you saw at dawn. The storyteller spins a tale of a merchant who bathed in rosewater and dreamed of a far-off city, only to find it years later. You think back to the Silk Road, where rosewater traveled to distant lands. Maybe those dreams inspired the journeys. A woman beside you sighs, whispering, "I tried it, saw nothing but stars." You chuckle, imagining her disappointed suitor. The fire crackles, and the storyteller's voice dips lower, describing rosewater as a gift from the goddess Anahita. You're tempted to ask if it ever worked, but you don't want to break the spell. The crowd murmurs, passing around a bowl of rosewater-soaked dates. You take one, the sweetness blending with the floral scent, and it's like eating the festival you joined earlier, but quieter, more intimate. A child tugs your sleeve, offering a rose petal. "For your dream," she says, and you smile, tucking it into your pocket, though you're not sure you believe in dream potions. The storyteller notices and winks. "Skeptical city dweller," he teases. You laugh, caught again, and nod. The night feels softer now, the rosewater's mystique weaving through the tales, tying them to the shrines, banquets, and trade routes you've seen. As the fire dies down, you feel a gentle drowsiness, the stories and scents lulling you. You're ready to step into the competitive world of artisans, where perfumers vie for royal favor under these same stars. You're weaving through a bustling artisan's quarter in Persepolis, where the clatter of tools and the scent of rosewater fill the narrow streets. You've stumbled into a tense gathering of perfumers, each vying for the king's patronage in a high-stakes competition to craft the finest rosewater blend. The air hums with rivalry as artisans in dyed tunics display their vials, their faces a mix of pride and nerves, while royal scribes jot notes on clay tablets. You're trying to blend in, sniffing a sample like you know what you're doing, but you're pretty sure you'd pick the wrong winner and spark a perfumer's feud. The quarter is alive with activity. Workshops spill onto the street, their tables crowded with copper stills, rose petals, and shimmering bottles. You spot a perfumer, her hands stained pink, presenting a vial to a stern-faced scribe, who sniffs it with a frown. A mainstream fact: Achaemenid kings around 500 BCE sponsored artisan guilds, including perfumers, to elevate crafts like rosewater production, as noted in Persepolis administrative records. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some perfumers slipped bribes, like extra vials, into their submissions, hoping to sway judges, though you suspect it just annoyed the scribes. Historians still argue whether these competitions were merit-based or swayed by politics. You're leaning toward politics, but the perfumer's confident nod makes you wonder. You're handed a vial by a young artisan, his eyes hopeful. "Try it," he urges. You sniff, and the rosewater is crisp with a hint of clove that stings your nose. It's good, but you're no expert, and you fumble the vial, nearly dropping it. He winces, muttering, "City hands." You laugh, caught again, and hand it back, wishing him luck. You think back to the royal perfumery, where exclusive blends were crafted. Here, it's a public stage, with artisans battling for a chance at that prestige. You notice a rival perfumer whispering to a scribe, slipping something into his palm. You raise an eyebrow, but the crowd's too busy to care. The competition heats up as a herald announces the final round. Perfumers present their blends to a royal envoy, who sniffs each vial with exaggerated care. You watch one artisan, his blend rejected, slump in defeat, while another beams as her vial is held aloft. The crowd cheers, and you join in, caught in the excitement. You ask a bystander about the prize, and he grins. A year's contract with the palace, and bragging rights forever. You chuckle, imagining perfumers boasting over wine. The rosewater scent ties this scene to the gardens, workshops, and festivals you've seen, a thread of ambition and art. As you slip away, the artisan's rivalry lingers in your mind, and you're ready to see how Rosewater's legacy faced threats, not from competitors, but from invaders in the fields where it all began. You're standing in a rose garden on the outskirts of Persepolis, but the air is tense, heavy with the dust of approaching danger rather than the usual sweetness of blooms. You're surrounded by farmers clutching sickles, their faces grim as they guard rows of rose bushes against rumors of invaders, Greeks perhaps, or nomadic raiders, threatening to trample the fields that fuel Persia's rosewater trade. The sun hangs low, casting long shadows, and you're trying to help stack baskets of petals, but one wrong move and you're probably tangled in thorns or running from a cavalry charge. The roses, usually a symbol of peace, now feel like a battlefield's prize. The garden is smaller than the one you saw at dawn, its irrigation channels clogged with debris from recent skirmishes. You notice broken stems and scattered petals, signs of a raid that's already passed. A mainstream fact, by 500 BCE, Persia's rose gardens, vital to its economy, were often targets during invasions, as noted in Greek accounts like Herodotus's Histories, which describe attacks on agricultural hubs. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some farmers spread rosewater around their fields, believing it warded off evil spirits sent by enemies, though you suspect it just made the invaders sneeze. Historians still argue whether this was a desperate ritual or a clever psychological tactic. You're leaning toward desperation, but the farmer's fierce determination makes you wonder. A grizzled farmer named Rostam hands you a basket, pointing to a patch of undamaged roses. "Hurry," he says, his voice rough. You start picking, pricking your fingers again, and wince, but his nod keeps you going. The scent is still intoxicating, a reminder of the bazaar and festivals, but now it's laced with urgency. You think back to the artisans' quarter, where perfumers competed for glory. Here, it's about survival, protecting the roses that tie Persia's culture together. Rostam mutters about a recent raid, pointing to a trampled corner of the field. "They took half our crop," he says. You grimace, imagining the lost vials. You glance at the horizon, where dust clouds hint at distant hooves. The farmers work faster, piling petals into carts, and you help, though your hands are clumsy. Rostam chuckles despite the tension. "City fingers," he teases, and you laugh, caught again, grateful for the brief lightness. You notice a woman sprinkling rosewater along the garden's edge, her lips moving in a quiet prayer. Whether it's for spirits or morale, it steadies the group. The roses, delicate but resilient, seem to mirror their resolve. You're struck by how this garden, like the rosewater itself, is both fragile and fiercely guarded, a lifeline for temples, banquets, and trade routes. As you finish filling a basket, the sun dips lower, and the farmers prepare to move their harvest to safety. The rosewater scent lingers, a defiant note in the chaos. You're ready to follow the story of how these roses and their secrets were preserved by scribes under the same embattled sky. You're hunched over a stone table in a dimly lit scriptorium in Persepolis, where the air smells of clay dust and the faint sweetness of rosewater from a nearby vial. Scribes, their fingers stained with ink, etch careful cuneiform onto damp clay tablets, preserving the secrets of rosewater production for future generations. You're trying to stay quiet, watching a scribe carve precise wedges with a reed stylus, but the urge to ask questions is strong, and you're pretty sure you'd smudge the clay if you tried to help. The room hums with focus, as if the weight of an empire rests on these tablets. The scriptorium is small, its walls lined with shelves of tablets and papyrus scrolls, lit by flickering oil lamps that cast long shadows. You notice a clay jar of rosewater on the table, used to dampen the scribe's hands for smoother writing. A mainstream fact, by 500 BCE, Achaemenid scribes recorded detailed agricultural and craft techniques, including rosewater recipes, in archives like those found at Persepolis, ensuring knowledge survived invasions. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some scribes hid coded symbols in their texts, supposedly to protect rosewater formulas from rival empires, though you suspect it was more about job security. Historians still argue whether these codes were practical or just scholarly flair. You're leaning toward flair, but the scribe's intense focus makes you think twice. A scribe named Arash hands you a tablet to inspect, warning, "Don't drop it." You hold it gingerly, feeling the cool, heavy clay, and squint at the tiny wedges detailing rose distillation. It's like reading a recipe for magic, with notes on petal ratios and fire temperatures. You think back to the threatened rose gardens where farmers fought to protect their crops. This tablet ensures their work lives on, even if invaders burn the fields. You ask Arash about the codes, and he smirks. "For clever eyes only," he says. You chuckle, imagining him outsmarting spies with a cryptic squiggle. You're tempted to trace a wedge, but your fingers hover, unsure. He laughs softly. "City hands," he teases, and you grin, caught again. The scriptorium's rhythm is steady, scribes muttering, stylized scratching, lamps flickering. You notice a younger scribe copying a tablet about rosewater blends for royal perfumeries, his brow furrowed in concentration. You realize these records tie together everything you've seen: the bazaar's vials, the temple's rituals, the caravan's jars. The rosewater's legacy is safe here, etched into clay. You ask if you can try writing, and Arash hands you a spare reed. Your attempt is wobbly, earning a patient sigh. "Takes years," he says, and you nod, humbled. The rosewater jar catches the lamplight, its scent grounding you in this quiet, vital work. As you step back, careful not to bump the shelves, you feel the weight of these tablets, not just their clay, but their role in preserving Persia's fragrant soul. You're ready to explore how Rosewater wove its way into the empire's love poetry under the same starlit sky. You're settled on a woven rug in a moonlit courtyard, the air soft with the scent of rosewater and the faint strum of a sitar echoing through Persepolis. A poet, his robe loose and his eyes bright with passion, recites verses about love and longing, weaving rosewater into every line as if it's the breath of romance itself. You're surrounded by listeners, their faces softened by the night, sipping rosewater-infused tea from clay cups, their murmurs blending with the music. You're trying to follow the poetry's rhythm, but the flowery metaphors are dizzying, and you're pretty sure you'd blush if you fully understood the subtext. The courtyard is intimate, framed by jasmine vines and flickering oil lamps that cast golden pools on the stone tiles. The poet gestures to a vial of rosewater on a low table, comparing a lover's gaze to its clarity. A mainstream fact, Persian poetry, flourishing by 500 BCE and later recorded in works like the Shahnameh, often used rosewater as a symbol of love and purity, tying it to emotional and spiritual ideals. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some poets claimed they composed better after inhaling rosewater fumes, believing it unlocked the heart, though you suspect it just cleared their sinuses. Historians still argue whether this was artistic inspiration or a cultural obsession with roses. You're leaning toward obsession, but the poet's fervent delivery makes you wonder. You sip your tea, the rosewater's floral note mingling with the bitterness, and it's like drinking the festival's joy in a quieter form. You think back to the Starry Festival, where rosewater was splashed in celebration. Here, it's a muse, fueling verses that make the listener sigh. A woman beside you whispers, "He wrote that for his beloved." You nod, caught in the romance, and ask about the rosewater trick. She laughs softly. "Try it," she says, passing you a vial. You inhale, and the scent is sharp, heady, but no sonnets spring to mind. You chuckle, admitting defeat, and she teases, "City poet." You grin, caught again, and settle back to listen. The poet shifts to a tale of two lovers meeting in a rose garden, their vows sealed with a shared vial of rosewater. The crowd leans in, some dabbing rosewater on their wrists as if to feel the story's magic. You notice a young man scribbling notes, maybe an aspiring poet himself, his quill scratching like the scribes you saw. The sitar player plucks a mournful note, and the poet's voice softens, describing rosewater as tears of the heart. You're struck by how this fragrance, born in gardens and distilled in workshops, becomes poetry here, tying together the empire's soul. You fumble your cup, nearly spilling, and a listener steadies it with a smile. The night feels endless, the rosewater scent wrapping you in its spell. As the poet pauses, the crowd claps softly, and you feel a gentle drowsiness, the verses lulling you like a lullaby. You're ready to reflect on how rosewater's legacy, crafted through these stories, endures despite time's passage. You're wandering through a quiet Persepolis street at dusk, the sky a deep indigo streaked with rose, as you reflect on how rosewater's legacy weaves through the empire's heart, from gardens to poetry. You pass a small stall where a vendor, her hands wrinkled from years of handling petals, pours rosewater into clay vials for a handful of coins. The city hums softly, merchants closing up, priests chanting in distant temples, lovers whispering verses under lamplight, and you realize rosewater isn't just a product, it's a thread stitching together Persia's culture. You're tempted to buy a vial as a keepsake, but you're pretty sure you'd drop it before you got home. The street is lined with low stone buildings, their walls etched with fading rose motifs, and you smell the faint floral scent drifting from open windows. A mainstream fact, rosewater, by 500 BCE, was so integral to Achaemenid society that it appeared in royal decrees, temple records, and trade logs, cementing Persia's reputation as a fragrance empire. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some locals believed rosewater sprinkled at doorways kept bad dreams away, though you suspect it just made their home smell divine. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual practice or a charming superstition. You're leaning towards superstition, but the vendor's earnest nod as she hands a vial to a child makes you wonder. You pause at a corner where a young couple shares a rosewater-soaked sweet, their laughter soft against the evening's calm. You think back to the poet's courtyard, where rosewater inspired love songs. Here, it's everyday life, a quiet ritual in a bustling empire. You ask the vendor about her trade, and she smiles. "Roses never fade," she says, tapping a vial. You chuckle, imagining her selling that line to every passerby. The scent reminds you of the gardens, the workshops, the caravans, each moment you've seen tied to this fragrance. You try to haggle for a vial, but your city charm fails, and she teases, "City wallet." You laugh, caught again, and pay full price. The street grows quieter as you walk, passing a scribe etching a tablet under a lamp, perhaps recording a rosewater recipe for posterity. You notice a woman sprinkling rosewater at her doorstep, her face serene, and you're struck by how this simple act echoes the temple rituals and festival splashes. It's not just luxury or medicine, it's comfort, a constant in a changing world. You buy a sweet from another stall. It's rosewater glaze, sticky but delicious, and it feels like tasting the empire itself. The vendor winks, saying, "Good for dreams." You grin, half believing her, and tuck the vial you bought into your robe, careful not to crush it. As the stars emerge, you feel the weight of Rosewater's story, sacred, practical, poetic. You're ready to linger in this fading legacy, letting its gentle influence carry you toward a final, soothing reflection under the Persian night. You're resting on a low stone bench in a quiet Persian garden, the night air cool and heavy with the scent of roses, as you reflect on how Rosewater's legacy lingers like a whisper through time. The stars above Persepolis glitter softly, and you're surrounded by the same rose bushes you saw at dawn, their petals now closed against the dark. You hold the vial you bought from the street vendor, its clay warm in your hand, and you realize this fragrance, born in gardens, distilled in workshops, traded across deserts, has woven a thread through every moment you've witnessed. You're tempted to sprinkle it now, to feel part of this ancient world, but you're pretty sure you'd just make a mess and wake the sleeping birds. The garden is still, save for the gentle trickle of an irrigation channel and the occasional rustle of leaves. You think of the bazaar's chaos, the temple's rituals, the poet's verses, all tied to this simple liquid. A mainstream fact, Rosewater's influence, rooted in Achaemenid Persia by 500 BCE, spread across cultures, shaping perfumery and cuisine in places like India and medieval Europe, as archaeological trade records show. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some Persians believed rosewater could carry memories, preserving moments like a scent trapped in a bottle, though you suspect it just made their story smell sweeter. Historians still argue whether this was poetic fancy or a cultural belief in rosewater's power. You're leaning toward fancy, but the vial in your hand feels like it holds more than just fragrance. You uncork it, and the scent drifts out, soft and familiar, like a memory of the festival's laughter or the caravan's dust. You think back to the scribes, etching Rosewater's secrets into clay, ensuring its legacy survived invasions. Here in this quiet garden, that legacy feels alive, a quiet hum beneath the empire's grandeur. You dab a drop on your wrist, and it's cool, grounding, like a final note in the poet's song. A nightbird chirps, and you smile, imagining it scolding you for disturbing its sleep. "City dweller," you mutter to yourself, chuckling at how you've been caught so many times. The stars seem brighter now, and you feel a gentle drowsiness, the rosewater scent blending with the garden's calm. You're struck by how this fragrance, so delicate, has outlasted empires, still used today in perfumes, sweets, and rituals. You close your eyes, letting the memories of bazaars, shrines, and starry nights settle over you like a soft blanket. The world feels distant, the garden's quiet, wrapping you in peace. Now let's slow things down, let the night carry you. You're still in that garden, the roses around you swaying gently, their scent fading into a soft floral hum. The stars above Persepolis are steady, eternal, watching over the same fields where farmers once picked petals at dawn. You feel the vial in your hand, its clay cool, a tiny piece of an empire that dreamed in fragrance. Let the sound of the irrigation channel, that gentle trickle, wash away the day's weight. You're not in Persepolis anymore, but in your own quiet space, the Rosewater's memory lingering like a lullaby. Breathe in, slow and deep, and let the scent of roses, the echo of poets and priests, drift you toward sleep. The world can wait. Tonight you're held by the stars, the garden, the calm. Sleep well, dreamer. Sweet dreams.